Alright, in the previous video, we talked about the role of sugar in our body and how does insulin work like a key to let sugar in to the muscle cells. Alright, so in this video blog, we're going to talk about what's causing the gumming up of the locks in such a way that the insulin is not working anymore. The key is not ready to go in the lock. Alright, so uh, the gum that's stuffed up into the lock is actually fat. So fat is the culprit. It is uh, it is in places where it's not supposed to be. So a natural question that comes up is what is fat doing inside the muscles in the first place? All right, so here's the thing. Fat is supposed to be stored in fat cells, or technical term is adipose tissue. All right, there are certain number of cells we have. All of us have a certain number. They don't change once you become an adult, and that's where you store your fat. Where does the fat come from? It comes from food. If you have a lot of fried food, there's a lot of fat in it. If you have a lot of cheese or a lot of dairy, a lot of butter, it's all fat in there as well, high amount of fat. So when you consume these things, they have to go somewhere. So our body takes that and it stuffs it into the fat cells. All right, so now what happens if the fat cells are full? They're stuffed now, there's no more room to put the fat. So then the body says, well, I'm not going to say no to fat because it's good. Fat is like our insurance for future. I'm going to try and save it wherever I can. So it finds places to save. And those of you who always had struggle with fat know places where fat goes. Some examples are around the belly, around the hips, under the skin, the face, the neck. So it can cause all sorts of problems. We'll talk about in a separate video blog the effects of fat on our body. Uh, so yes, so then a good analogy to try and understand why body does this is an example I gave to a friend of mine this morning. I said that let's see, I have lots of cash. I have like hundreds of thousands of dollars of cash, and I bring it all to you at your doorstep. What are you going to do with it? So the first thing you'll do is you'll probably try and take some of that money and put it in the safe. Let's assume you have a big safe. You stuff it all in, but it can only take so much. So then you stuff it all in, push the door in, lock the safe. Then you can take some and maybe put in your wallet and maybe put a little bit in a purse if you carry a purse, and then there's still tons of cash left. All right, so what are you going to do with it? So then you take that, you go into the kitchen, you open the jars. It's got beans in it. Half the jar is empty, so you stuff the money in there because you want to store it. You know that it's good for you. Money can be used for future. So let's assume there are no banks. All right, so in this example we try and save stuff the money where we won't normally do, but in everything else is full, so we try to find places to store it. The same thing with fat. The body is creative. It tries to find places to store it, and one convenient way to store it is inside the muscle. So that's where the fat creates problems. Once it's inside the muscle, it comes up the locks. Insulin is there, but insulin is not able to help the sugar be transported inside the muscle. So the sugar naturally stays in the blood and you get elevated blood sugar levels. All right, so there have been studies, number of studies actually, that have shown that the amount of fat that's inside your muscle is correlated to how resistant you are resistant you are to insulin. So they've done MRIs, ultrasound to image the level of fat inside the muscle. So these are very fine studies that have shown this relationship. The more fat you have in the muscle, the greater likelihood you have of developing diabetes, type 2 diabetes. All right, so um, now we've identified that one source of fat in the body is from the food we eat. All right, the food, if it has a high amount of fat, especially the saturated fat. Saturated fat actually means fat that becomes saturated or becomes hard, in room temperature. So things like any fat, lard is a good example. You can just put it in a jar, and it's like butter. Butter itself is saturated fat. Coconut oil is saturated fat. So all these things are actually pretty bad for your insulin resistance, because it'll make it hard for insulin to do its job. So that's obviously one source of fat. So let's say if you're a thin person, if you're very thin, can you develop diabetes? Yeah, I think you can. It really depends on what your diet is like. Because you're thin, obviously you don't have any fat on your body that's stored in fat cells, or it's very small amounts. But then you're eating a high fat diet, so your blood is always circulating with high amount of fats. So that can also create problems with your insulin. The other source of fat in your blood is if you're obese, if you're overweight, if you have a lot of fat in your fat cells. So naturally, some of that fat spills over, because the fat cells are now overflowing with fat. So naturally, during our day-to-day life, some of the fat spills over into the blood, and that produces the same effect. It creates trouble for the insulin. So the take-home message then is diabetes is a disease of excess fat. So that may come as a surprise to a lot of you, that diabetes is not, it's not caused because eating too much sugar. If you eat a lot of sugar, actually, our body produces more insulin, and that insulin takes that sugar, shuttles it to wherever it's supposed to go, and everything is hunky-dory. The problem happens when you have excess fat. So that's what I want you to take home with, that diabetes is a disease of high fat or excess fat, and not really a lot of excess sugar. So I hope this information is helpful. In our next blog, we'll talk about what are some strategies one could take, based on research, of course, on reversing or curing yourself of type 2 diabetes. Stay tuned. Bye.